So today I'm here to do a video talking about the 10 biggest assumptions you all have about me and my channel. I have compiled this from various comments as well as some things I've heard online and seen on Reddit talking about me and my content. And so I think it's time to bust some of these myths, address a couple things that are sort of true, and if that all sounds good, let's get started. Now the first assumption I hear a lot is the fact that people assume that I'm a stay-at-home mom. I assume this has to do with the fact that I read a lot and also post videos quite regularly. And so a lot of people assume that I find that time by staying at home with my child. Now, first off, I always find it a strange assumption because I would argue that when my child is home with me, I get a lot less done. And no, other than my maternity leave, which technically here in Canada is a year, so I did take a year to be with them. But other than that, I've been working full-time the entire time I've been on Booktube, and all of my filming and reading time, which I'll talk about more in this video, have all been done outside of those hours. And again, I think it would be weird if I was staying at home as a parent and suddenly using those hours to film videos, because arguably if I was a stay-at-home mom, I would be responsible for the primary care of my child during the hours when I supposedly would be sitting around and filming and reading all day. And that definitely is not the case. I respect and have so much appreciation for stay-at-home parents, but I am not one and have never been outside of my maternity leave. The next one ties into that, and I see a lot of comments saying how they assume that Booktube is my full-time job. And so with some of the comments, I'm not certain whether or not they think that this is equivalent to a full-time income. And I will say it is not. The money that I make from Booktube, including my Patreon account, is nowhere near my daytime salary. It is in no point going to replace it. And it's just the fact that I recognize my analytics and where I'm at, and I'm really not trying to replace my day job, and instead just using this as a fun outlet to talk about books. But definitely this does not pay the bills. This does not put shoes on my child or put food on the table. This is something that does technically make a little bit of side income for me, but nothing substantial. And again, I'm still working a full-time job on top of this. I respect and understand that other booktubers have gotten to the point that they do this full-time. I'm nowhere near that. And if I ever give across that impression, I don't know how, because again, my editing is terrible and I'm so basic. I don't do videos every day. And so definitely not at that point. I would have to make huge changes and grow my audience substantially for that to ever be an option. And honestly, I don't want that pressure. Now, the next assumption that I hear a lot is the fact that people who do realize that I have a daytime job assume that I'm able to use that time, not necessarily to film videos, but I use that time to read. And that is not the case. If my boss is watching this, I think they can clearly tell that I am constantly on Zoom meetings, I'm sending emails, making phone calls, and there is no way I would get done the amount of work I have to get done every day if I was taking time to read. I will use my lunch break to read, but honestly, especially with my current job, often I just work through my lunch hour or lunch break anyway and just keep going because my work is a lot more based off of getting things done rather than simply putting in hours. So the only time I've ever had a job was where I was working as a receptionist and I was allowed to read my university textbooks if there was nothing else to do. But that was a very long time ago, well before I started Booktube. So as of the years that I have been filming videos, I've never had a job during that period where I have been able to read on the job, whether it be audiobooks or physical books. All of that reading is always done outside of my work hours. And I'm in fact jealous of people who do get to read, say if they are truckers and get to listen to audiobooks when they're out and about. But obviously every job has its challenges, and I realize there are the downsides that often come with the jobs that have the ability to read at the same time. So not the case with me. Very cool when people can do that and have it work for their jobs, but definitely not the case. I will listen to music while I work, and that is about it. The next assumption is one of the most common ones I get, as in I probably get a version of this comment every week or two, and that's the assumption that I'm either a teacher or a librarian. Now, the librarian I perhaps get a bit more because I think when someone sees someone who, like me, reads a high number of books every year, there is this assumption that naturally I would have chosen a career that would allow me to be surrounded by books. My understanding is that librarians, just like most of us, don't get the opportunity to read during our jobs anyway, so it's kind of a bit of a false paradigm, but I can at least see where they're coming with that. As for the teacher part, that I don't really understand. So if you have reasons why I potentially look like a teacher, I'd love to know, because I don't know how I give off teacher vibes. I talk about a lot of dark and disturbing books. I talk about loving when people's arms get ripped off and body horror and all of that. And I just feel like I'm not giving off the vibes as someone you want to be teaching your children. So I am not a teacher. teacher. I've never thought about being a teacher. It's not something I desire. I love my own child, but I have no interest in teaching them or anyone else. There's a reason we don't homeschool, and it's just not my job. If you are interested, I'll give the basics that I work in a sales position in a technology company, which is what I've been doing for years in different positions. And so that is my own background, which has nothing to do with books, nothing to do with publishing. I love it, but it's completely separate from my Booktube life. The next assumption I've heard is one that I kind of am responsible for starting this rumor, and that is the fact that people think that I review books that I DNF. Now, as I mentioned, this is kind of my own fault. I did a video a while back where I talked about how I have started to read more by DNFing more books, meaning that if I'm not enjoying a book, I will typically try to put it down and pick up something else I'm enjoying. And by putting down the bad books, I'm actually finding myself more eager to read, because if you're loving what you're reading, you're going to read more. That was the premise of the video. However, if you follow my channel, you'll know that I do occasionally talk about negative books on my channel. And so because I do that, whenever I would talk about a negative book, someone would said, oh, well, you DNF books that you don't like, so you must not have finished this book, and you're pretending you finished it in order to post this review. And so hopefully it goes without saying, but I am someone who leans on the side of if you don't finish a book, I don't think it's proper to review it. I really don't like DNF reviews in general, because I do think that you have to push yourself through the entire book in order to fully have an opinion on it, because often the ending of a book can completely reframe the story, and you need to give the author a chance to redeem themselves. And so while I say that I put down a lot of books that I'm not enjoying, I also said in that video that if I'm getting a book for review from a publisher, I will push through. I'm someone who tries to read everything that is sent to me by publishers, if at least I requested it. And sometimes I will still finish a book that I'm not enjoying that is a backlist title from my library, because of the fact that I know there are people who are looking for my review. But if I'm just reading solely for pleasure, I DNF hundreds of books every year that never get discussed on my channel. And that is what I meant by that video. I perhaps wasn't clear enough, and so now every time I talk about negative books, there's always someone saying, oh, you only gave that book 2 stars, so clearly you didn't finish it. So it's a silly thing, but even now as I talk about books that I'm not enjoying, people assume that I haven't finished it, and I'm just pretending that I finished it for the sake of the video. But trust me, if I DNF a book, it gets put on secret hidden shelves on Goodreads. Actually, they're not that hidden. You can figure out which ones they are. And that is the only place you'll see them. I do not give them a star rating. I do not talk about them further on my channel unless I go back and reread and finish them, because personally, I feel like DNFs should not be reviews, and I don't do that, despite what you all think. Next is the fact that a lot of you assume that I only give positive reviews, especially if I receive a book from a publisher. And I don't really know where this assumption comes from, because I feel like if someone watches my channel regularly, they will notice that I do typically have at least a couple negative books in my wrap-up videos, and more often than not, because of the fact I just mentioned, that I'm more likely to DNF books that are from my library that no one cares about, that's just some random book I picked up and I will just let it go. If I get a book from a publisher and I don't like it, I will read it through, I will hate it, and then I will talk about it on camera. Now, I am someone who does believe that certain books are for certain readers, so there's times where I will say, this book was not for me, it was like this, I don't really enjoy this tone, but you might enjoy it more. So yes, maybe I'm not providing the rant reviews that certain people are looking for. That might be something you don't like about my channel. Maybe you'd like me to be a bit harsher. Sometimes I will say, I don't understand why people like this book. I don't see the value in it. I see these problems. I see this as being problematic, or just weak writing or weak character work. And I will try to be as blunt as possible. It's something that I have worked on. And I've talked about in previous videos that definitely years ago, like I'm talking 10 years ago when I first started this channel. Yes, my channel's that old. I definitely had moments when I first got ARCs from publishers that I was a little bit nicer on camera than I should have been, because I was nervous to give negative reviews. But I think this far in, hopefully those who watch my videos regularly will see that in recent reviews in the years prior, I have gotten to the point of trying to be as blunt as possible, to be as clear as possible, so that you don't waste your money on a book that I don't see value in. Now, the next assumption I hear from people is that all the books that I read on my channel are all read via audiobooks. Now, I assume this criticism or comment typically comes from those of you that don't really consider audiobooks to be real reading experiences, and rather think that it's kind of a way of cheating the system. Now, I don't hide away from the fact that I do audiobooks on my channel. I do try to mention when I enjoy a particular audiobook narration. I try not to hide that. But you are right that the percentage of books I read on audio has changed and shifted over the year, but there is some truth to it that there was a point in time on my channel where a huge portion of the books I was reading were done on audio. I think I mentioned this before, but when my child was roughly, say, 1.5 to 3, there was a period of time where I was having a lot of time where I needed to keep my eyeballs on them during the day. I was very tired and not doing a lot of reading after they went to bed, or rather my reading time after bed was instead taken over by editing videos. And so my primary reading time was audiobooks because it allowed me to watch my child. They could go to the park and I could go with them and just have an earbud in so that I could be listening to something while we were hanging out and walking around and all of that. And so I do admit that for that period of time, I was probably doing about 80% of my reading on audio. And I don't want to pretend I wasn't. If you paid attention to those wrap-ups, sometimes people would notice that I was listening to everything, and they would actually ask me and say, what did you physically read this month? And they weren't entirely wrong. However, I do want to mention a few things, and that's the fact that while I think that some books are better experienced on audio, I also think that doing everything on audio is a mistake. There were definitely books that I read on the audio form that I didn't think the narrator did any favors, and I definitely look back and realize that I would have enjoyed the book far more if I had physically read it, and it was a detriment that I would choose the audiobook version over everything out of convenience rather than prioritizing the kind of story experience that would give me the best chance of really loving the book. So a couple things came out of that. Eventually my child got older. I was spending more time physically reading just due to kind of changes in life. And I found myself loving reading physical books again. And my reading shifted far in the other direction. And so at different points, that percentage has changed, and I really don't have a specific number. I would say roughly probably 30% of the books that I'm reading in a month are on audio. And then of course, leaving the other 70% as physical books. Keep in mind that I tend to prefer rereading on audio. So often the books I'm reading on audio are not books I'm reviewing on my channel. Often I'm just rereading my same favorites. And then the books I'm physically reading are usually the ones that turn into reviews because I just re-listen to my favorites over and over again. And it's more just something to do and something to spend my time listening to rather than experiencing new books, which I typically prefer to do via the physical book. And I also can read physically a lot faster than I can do audio. So for instance, in the course of time where I'm doing one audiobook, I can often read say 3 physical books. So again, as a percentage, it works out that it doesn't overtake my physical reading anymore. Now again, some people prefer audiobook. I respect that. I don't want to naysay it because I did it, but I do think you can take audiobook reading too far because I experienced it. I experienced a lot of burnout, and I found myself just hating everything I was reading because I was tired of listening with my ears when I wanted to be reading with my eyeballs. So I think a mixture of both is great. Working in the middle and doing a bit of both is where my sweet spot is. And again, sometimes that percentage shifts one way or the other, just depending on what I'm doing, what I have time for, and what I'm feeling, which I think is the most natural and organic way to go. Ooh, that was a long one. The next assumption I get quite a bit is the fact that people assume that I'm a huge horror movie buff. They assume that I have watched all the classics, that I'm constantly watching all the new movies that are coming out in the genre, and assume that it's my go-to genre, my comfort genre. And that's not the case. Now, it's not to say that it's entirely wrong. I do now do a semi-regular horror movie night with some friends, so maybe once every 2-3 months we'll get together and watch a horror movie. And I have taken some time as a horror reviewer to go back and watch some of the horror classics I never watched as a child because it wasn't my go-to genre as even a teenager. And so I definitely am filling in the gaps, but there's still more gaps that I need to fill in. A lot of people are surprised by the number of films that they can list off that are very iconic horror movies that I haven't gotten to. Again, I'm slowly watching through them, but at a very slow pace. And I'm someone who honestly, if I'm sick, if I need a comfort watch, I will pick up a rom-com. And that's not what people expect. Given my taste in books, people assume that I go for a rewatch of The Exorcist or something like that, or Aliens. But honestly, I'm someone who watches a lot of things that I would never read for my channel. And it's interesting to see the discrepancy between one form of media versus the other. And again, it's not like I don't like horror movies, but it's not my go-to. It's something I kind of purposely carve out with some friends, and I do enjoy that. But I probably watch maybe 5 horror movies a year, maybe. And again, I'm still doing catch up for the last, say, 30 years. But yeah, there's a lot of horror movies I still need to see, and it's a little embarrassing to admit that on camera. All right, the next assumption is a biggie and probably one that a lot of you were wondering about when you clicked on this video. And it's a question of, do I skim read? There's a lot of questioning around whether or not I'm completing proper books because of the fact that I read so much. And have I ever been tempted to skim read? Yes. Have I ever found myself reading through a page and then I get to a chapter and realize that I don't remember anything I just read? Yes. But there's a couple things that happen. So if I realize that I haven't paid attention to anything that I was reading, I go back and I start again, and I find the point where I zoned out, and then I keep going from there. Or if I find myself having that feeling of skim reading because the book is not grabbing me, I put the book down. I DNF it if all possible. If it's a book I got for review, I might force myself to continue on and force myself to focus and read it, and you bet there's gonna be a pretty negative review at the end if I have to force myself through a book, which is why I'm trying to be more careful when it comes to requesting books for review. But anyway, so have I ever gone through the process of starting to skim through a book and stopping to pay attention and finding myself at a later point without really knowing what's going on? Yes, I would imagine most people reading this can probably relate to that experience. I think a lot of us find ourselves reading a chapter and then suddenly our phone is out and we're scrolling Reddit or something like that. And that has happened to me. I think that my focus is definitely poor at times. I think social media is very loud, and while I talk about in other videos trying to be more productive and more focused in my reading, it's always a work in progress. And so something that I acknowledge is that there are times that I start skimming, but the difference is that I don't keep going. I don't think, well, I'll just skim through the rest of this and pretend to read and review it. I don't think that's reading the book. I don't think that counts. And quite honestly, if I skim through a book, it'd be pretty much impossible for me to review it on camera because I wouldn't actually know what the book was about. If you're just flipping pages, that's not reading. And so at the end of the day, if I need to review a book, I need to actually have read it. So have I ever started to skim pages? Yes, but I don't think that that's what the question or assumption means. I think people assume that I'm purposely just skimming through it and then pretending to review it, which takes me to my last assumption. So that last assumption is the fact that apparently some people think that I fake reading altogether for the sake of my YouTube channel. And this isn't one I really hear a lot directly to me, but I have heard this somewhat through the Booktube grapevine, so people kind of gossip and share things that they've heard from other people. And also I will peek occasionally on some of the Booktube snark type pages to see what people are saying. And apparently some people think that there is no possible way that I read as much as I do, and that therefore I must be faking it. It definitely hits strange that people make those assumptions about me. I hope I don't give off of the appearance or seem to be the kind of person who would be trying to scam people or mislead people. I hope I come across a little bit more transparent and clear on camera. And so it's one that I really can only address by saying, yes, I do read the books I do. I think it'd be pretty weird if I was just looking up articles. And even again, what would be the purpose? Would I be trying to get YouTube famous in one of the smallish niches of the YouTube atmosphere or community of trying to be a big booktuber by reading all these books or pretending to read all these books? I just don't see a lot of value in it. I always have said that my value of reading, it really comes down to the fact that I get so much enjoyment out of it. And I started my Booktube channel because I wanted to create a community around it. I do think it's kind of funny that that is the big assumption everyone comes to when they see how much I read and think, oh, she must be faking it. And that's just, it almost seems more work to fake it than it would be to actually read the books, is how I feel about that. So that's it for this video here. I just wanted this to be honestly a fun video. I'm not trying to justify or apologize or call people out for having assumptions about me. It's a great way to clarify a few things that people always assume on my channel. So hopefully this is kind of another way to do a Q&A, having answers to questions that I know people are thinking, even if they're not necessarily directly asking me or more just kind of talking about me. And so hopefully you enjoyed this. Again, I'm not taking it too seriously. I don't feel like I'm being attacked on the internet, or I don't feel offended. Well, maybe the last one I feel a bit offended about, but realistically, I hope this is just a fun way to make a different video, talk about some of the assumptions that we have about other people, and talk about what's true and what may not be, and everything in between. So if you're new to my channel, do you want to stick around and subscribe? I do read, or pretend to read, a lot of horror, thrillers, science fiction, fantasy, and other dark things. You can help me out with this video with a big thumbs up, and if you want to hit that little notification bell, you'll never miss a video from me. Thanks so much for watching. Talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.